The river was already rising when the first cry cut through the storm. A pregnant German shepherd was trapped between stone and ice, minutes away from being swept under. A former Navy SEAL could have turned back, but he stepped into the freezing water instead. Beside him, his loyal K-8 partner didn't hesitate, even when the current nearly pulled them under. What they saved that night was more than a life. It was the beginning of a truth someone wanted buried. Sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky. They walk into the storm and choose not to leave. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and share your thoughts after the story. And if you believe in courage like this, please like and subscribe to support more stories like this. Late autumn came early that year in northern Montana. The storm had rolled down from the Canadian border without warning, dragging sleet and hard rain across the valley. The Flathead River, fed by glacier melt and sudden snow, had swollen into something restless and unpredictable. The water ran slate gray beneath a sky the color of old steel, carrying broken branches and chunks of ice like splintered bones. The air cut sharp against exposed skin. Colton Reeves stood at the edge of the trail overlooking the river basin, boots planted wide in the mud, posture steady against the wind. At 41, he carried strength the way some men carried grief, quietly, without display. He was tall, just over 6 feet, built lean and functional rather than bulky. His jaw was square and clean-shaven, the angles of his cheekbones sharp beneath skin weathered by northern cold. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, slightly longer than regulation, but still disciplined, never careless. Gray-blue eyes scanned the river with the patience of someone who had spent years studying danger before it moved. He wore the same olive-gray tactical combat shirt he always did, softened with age, faded at the shoulders and wrists from seasons of work. His earth-toned combat pants were worn at the knees, the fabric loosened from use. Old military boots anchored him to the ground. A weathered watch circled his wrist, scratched but functional. Beside him stood Ranger. Ranger was a 5-year-old German shepherd, tall at the shoulder and broad through the chest, his coat a dense gray cream with a darker saddle running along his spine. His fur thickened around the neck, framing a steady, intelligent face. Amber-brown eyes moved constantly, assessing terrain, scent, wind. A dark leather collar sat against his coat, the metal tag engraved with his name catching faint light when he shifted. Ranger had once worked alongside Colton in places where maps were suggestions and hesitation cost lives. He was disciplined, precise, rarely impulsive, which was why Colton noticed immediately when Ranger froze, not stiff in fear, still in focus. The dog's ears angled forward, his body lowered half an inch, weight redistributing subtly. He wasn't reacting to prey. He wasn't alarmed by movement. He was listening. Colton didn't hear it at first. Only rain striking leaves. Only the low thunder of water colliding against stone. Then it came. A thin sound. Broken. Not wind. Not metal. Not machinery. A cry. It vanished as quickly as it surfaced. Colton's jaw tightened. Ranger moved before being told. They descended the embankment together, boots sliding in mud, the smell of river silt rising thick and metallic. The river basin opened below them, a jagged stretch of water funneling between stone outcroppings where glacier melt had carved the earth raw. And there she was, a German shepherd trapped between 2 black rocks near the river's bend. Her coat was gray cream, lighter than Ranger's, though soaked dark by water. Her frame was lean but powerful, ribs faintly visible beneath tension. Her hind leg was wedged awkwardly between submerged stones. Her abdomen was swollen, unmistakably heavy with pregnancy. She did not thrash. She did not scream. She leaned into the current, bracing her body against the force of the water. And when her head lifted, her eyes locked onto Colton's. They were amber, but sharper. Not panicked. Calculating. She growled once, not wildly. A warning. Colton slowed. "She's not trying to get out," he murmured, mostly to himself. Ranger stepped closer but stopped short of the waterline, awaiting direction. His muscles trembled, not with fear, but readiness. The river surged harder, striking the female's side. Her back paws slipped half an inch. She shifted her weight, not to free herself, but to shield something behind her. Colton's eyes narrowed. There, just beyond her flank, was a narrow strip of raised gravel barely above water level. He saw movement, small, weak, new. His breath stilled. She wasn't fighting to survive. She was holding position to protect. Colton uncoiled the rope from his pack with efficient calm. Years of training returned without effort. He anchored the line around a thick pine trunk behind him, double knotting with practiced precision. Ranger watched the rope as if remembering the same drills in different landscapes. The female's growl deepened when Colton stepped into the water. It was glacial. The cold struck like impact, rising through his boots and into his bones. "I'm not taking them," he said quietly. She didn't understand the words, but she understood tone. Still, she bared her teeth, not to attack, to warn. Her leg was pinned hard between rocks, the angle unnatural. The water kept slamming debris against her ribs. Colton edged closer, weight low, rope tight across his back. Ranger positioned himself downstream, bracing, ready to intercept anything that might strike. For a split second, lightning flashed across the sky, and in that white burst of light, the female stopped growling. Her ears shifted, not toward Colton, toward the tree line above the basin. Ranger turned too. Colton followed their gaze. Nothing moved. No sound except rain. But something changed. A stillness where there shouldn't have been one. It lasted only a breath. Then the river roared again. Colton filed the moment away. Instinct didn't lie. Not in dogs trained by force and not in those trained by choice. He reached for her trapped leg. She snapped, not to bite him, but to strike near his hand. A warning shot. Controlled. "Easy," he said, lowering his voice. The word was steady, grounded, shaped by authority but not aggression. Ranger shifted closer to her shoulder, not touching, just close enough to anchor presence. The female's breathing stuttered. She measured them both. Then she froze. Not relaxed, but permitting. Colton slid his fingers beneath the submerged stone, feeling for leverage. The rock had wedged against her joint. He adjusted his stance, ignoring the cold creeping upward. The rope pulled taut against his back. The river surged again, harder this time. A broken branch slammed into his thigh. He nearly lost footing. Ranger lunged forward instinctively, teeth gripping the rope to stabilize the tension. Colton exhaled slowly. "Hold." The word was meant for Ranger, but the female reacted. Her muscles tightened. She stopped resisting the rock, and that was the moment the stone shifted. Her leg came free with a sickening jerk. She collapsed forward into him as the current seized the opportunity, dragging both sideways. The rope snapped tight. Colton locked his stance, pulling her weight into his chest. For a heartbeat, all three of them were suspended between force and surrender. He chose force. He pivoted toward shore, guiding her body with controlled movements, never lifting fully, just steering, step by deliberate step. The raised gravel patch behind her trembled as the water rose. Two small shapes clung together, alive, barely. The female twisted toward them instinctively. Colton made a decision in the space of a breath. He released one hand from her collar scruff and reached back toward the gravel. The first puppy fit in his palm, slick, trembling. The second slid dangerously close to the waterline. Ranger moved before being commanded, blocking the surge with his body, shoulders braced against debris. Colton secured both pups against his chest beneath his jacket. The female saw. Her growl died, not replaced by trust, replaced by something quieter. Permission. Together, they reached the bank as the storm finally broke overhead. Rain thickened into sheets, wind bent trees, the basin disappeared into gray. On solid ground, the female staggered but did not collapse. She turned immediately, checking the pups Colton set carefully on dry leaves. Her nose pressed against each one, verifying life. Then she looked at him, not grateful, not submissive, aware. Ranger stepped back half a pace, giving space. Colton's breath came heavy in the cold air. Water dripped from his sleeves. His injured knee from years past throbbed beneath strain, but he ignored it. The storm howled. The female did not move toward him, but she did not retreat either. Between them lay two fragile lives and a river that had almost erased them. Trust had not been earned, but a line had been drawn, and for now, none of them would cross it. The storm did not fade when they reached the cabin. It followed them. Wind pressed against the wooden walls like a living thing trying to get inside. Rain struck the tin roof in uneven bursts. The pine trees around the clearing bent low, their branches scraping against one another in restless friction. Colton Reeves pushed the cabin door shut with his shoulder and slid the iron latch into place. The interior smelled of cedarwood, old leather, and the faint metallic trace of gun oil. The fire in the stone hearth had burned low while he was gone. He crossed the room in long strides and knelt, feeding at split logs until the flames climbed back to life. Light returned in slow pulses. Willow stood just inside the doorway, trembling, not from cold alone, but from strain. Water dripped from her gray cream coat onto the wooden floor. Her abdomen tightened in waves. Her hind leg, newly freed, tremored with aftershock. She did not lie down. Not yet. Her amber eyes moved from Colton to Ranger and back again, measuring distance, angle, escape. Ranger shook out his coat near the door, sending a spray of droplets into the air. He was taller, broader at the chest, his gray cream fur darker along the spine. He watched Willow without challenge. No dominance, no aggression. His ears were upright, but his posture was deliberately neutral. He had learned, long ago, that force was not the first tool. Colton moved slowly toward the wool blankets stacked near the hearth. He laid them out on the floor several feet from the fire, not too close to overheat, not too far to lose warmth. His movements were efficient but unhurried, the kind of control forged in rooms where panic had cost men their lives. "Your space," he said quietly. Willow did not understand the words, but she understood that he stopped advancing. Another contraction struck her. Her body folded in on itself, spine curving inward. A low sound escaped her throat, half growl, half pain. Colton stepped back. Labor had begun. He had seen birth before, in livestock, in wild rescue situations. but never like this. Never with eyes watching him the way hers were watching him now. She lowered herself onto the blanket, muscles rigid. Ranger circled once, then lay down several feet away, positioning himself between Willow and the door. Not possessive, protective. Minutes stretched thin. The fire crackled. Wind moaned through the chimney flue. The first puppy came quickly. Small, slick, too still. Willow twisted immediately, licking, nudging, trying to rouse it. Her movements were frantic now, breath ragged. The puppy did not respond. Colton's jaw tightened. He crouched halfway forward. Willow's head snapped up, teeth flashing. Ranger rose. He did not bark. He stepped between them, not blocking Willow, not blocking Colton, just occupying the space. Colton held Willow's gaze. "I'm not taking him," he said, voice low and steady. Another contraction rippled through her, stealing her focus for half a second. That was enough. Colton moved fast but controlled. He scooped the limp puppy into his hands and cleared its airway with 2 firm strokes of his fingers. He rubbed its ribs briskly with a dry cloth from the shelf near the hearth. The puppy remained still. Willow lunged, but stopped short when Ranger shifted subtly, holding her attention without force. Colton adjusted his grip and gave a sharp exhale of air across the puppy's nose. Nothing. He pressed 2 fingers gently but firmly against its tiny chest. "Come on," he murmured. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the cabin walls. Then, a twitch. Small. Barely there. Another rub. A thin gasp. The puppy convulsed weakly and let out a faint, broken cry. Willow froze. Not aggressive, stunned. Colton lowered the puppy back toward her, careful not to cross too quickly into her space. She did not bite. She pulled the puppy against her chest and began licking furiously, re-establishing what she almost lost. The second contraction followed soon after. The second pup arrived stronger, moving immediately. Willow curved her body around both of them, shielding them from the world. Colton leaned back onto his heels, breath leaving him in a long exhale. For a few seconds, the only sound inside the cabin was the crackle of fire and the faint squeaks of newborn life. Then something shifted. Willow lifted her head abruptly, her ears angled, not toward Colton, not toward Ranger, toward the rear wall of the cabin. Ranger reacted a split second later. He stood, posture tightening. Colton followed their focus. Nothing moved. No shadow crossed the window. No sound broke the wind. Yet both dogs remained fixed on that single direction, bodies coiled. The air inside the cabin felt heavier. Colton rose quietly and crossed to the back window. He lifted the edge of the curtain just enough to see. The clearing lay empty beneath sheets of rain. Pine branches swayed violently. No headlights. No figures. He lowered the curtain. Willow had not relaxed. Her eyes tracked something only she seemed to sense. A flicker of unease moved through him. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. He filed it away. Labor demanded focus. The next hour passed in slow increments of pain and breath. Willow's movements became more deliberate as instinct overtook panic. She adjusted the puppies with careful nudges, pressing them closer to her warmth. Ranger eventually lay down again, but his ears never softened. Colton moved to the kitchen counter, filling a metal bowl with warm water and bringing it to Willow's side. He placed it within reach, but outside her defensive perimeter. She eyed it, then drank. Small trust. Earned, not given. When the contractions ended and her breathing finally steadied, exhaustion overtook her. Her body sagged, muscles trembling from strain. Colton noticed then, clearly in the firelight, the marks around her neck. Not random scars. Symmetrical impressions. Faint burn lines beneath fur. He crouched closer, careful not to invade her space. Electronic collar, he murmured to himself. Not a stray, not feral, trained or controlled. He had seen similar devices years ago in overseas operations, equipment used to enforce compliance from a distance. His eyes darkened. Willow lifted her head slightly, watching him. He did not reach for the scar. He only observed. Another gust of wind struck the cabin, and somewhere outside a loose metal sheet clanged sharply against wood. Willow flinched violently. Her body curled tighter around the pups, shoulders rigid. Ranger did not flinch. He shifted closer to her instead. Colton felt the past brush against him like cold air under a door. There had been a night years ago, different storm, different continent, when metal on metal had meant incoming rotor blades and a decision that split his life in two. Stay and pull civilians from a burning structure, or withdraw on command. He had stayed. Men under his leadership had not made it back. The board had ruled the outcome complicated. He had ruled it unforgivable. He had left the teams months later, not because he was asked to, but because silence had grown louder than gunfire. He stared at the marks on Willow's neck, controlled, forced, maybe punished. His jaw tightened. "You don't flinch like that unless someone taught you to," he said quietly. Willow's eyes remained on him, not trusting, but listening. The fire burned lower again. Colton rose to add another log. Behind him, Ranger shifted suddenly, stepping forward until he stood directly between Willow and Colton. Not in warning, in assessment. Ranger's gaze flicked from Willow to Colton. A silent question. "Are we safe?" Colton answered without words, adjusting the latch on the door and checking the small rifle mounted above the hearth, not touching it, only confirming its presence. He returned to the blankets and lowered himself onto the floor several feet away, leaning back against the wall. He did not approach closer. He did not force connection. He let the fire fill the silence. The storm outside began to soften after midnight. Rain turned to sleet. Wind shifted direction. Inside the cabin, 3 breaths eventually found rhythm. Willow slept in short intervals, waking at every unfamiliar sound. Ranger remained alert but less rigid now, as if recalibrating the threat level. Colton watched the rise and fall of the female's ribcage. He had stepped into the river because he could not walk away. He had stayed because leaving once had cost too much. Tonight, he had not been too late. The puppies squeaked softly in their sleep. Willow's head rested over them protectively, and for the first time since the storm began, the cabin felt less like a shelter from danger, and more like the beginning of something neither of them had planned. Morning came without sunlight. The storm had burned itself out sometime before dawn, leaving behind a sky the color of ash and a valley wrapped in brittle quiet. Snow clung in uneven patches along the tree line. The river had receded slightly, but still moved with heavy intent, swollen and impatient beneath thinning clouds. Inside the cabin, warmth lingered. Willow lay curled around her 2 pups, her gray-cream coat blending into the wool blankets near the hearth. The puppies were stronger this morning, blind, searching blindly for warmth and milk, their tiny bodies pressing instinctively toward life. Willow's eyes followed every movement in the room, though her posture had softened by degrees. She was no longer coiled for immediate defense, but she was not relaxed either. Ranger stood near the window, watching the clearing. His broad shoulders blocked part of the light filtering through frost-lined glass. His amber eyes scanned beyond what human vision could measure, reading wind direction, scent drift, sound carried across snow. Colton Reeves poured coffee into a chipped enamel mug, the steam rising faintly in the cool air. He had not slept more than an hour at a time. His movements were steady but slower than usual, fatigue sitting behind his gray-blue eyes like unspoken weight. At 41, he had learned that exhaustion did not dull instinct. It sharpened it in strange ways. A vehicle engine approached mid-morning. Not fast, not careless. Ranger's ears pivoted before the sound fully registered. Willow's head rose sharply, body tightening around the pups. Colton set the mug down. The engine cut outside. A door opened, closed, boots crunched against packed snow. He moved to the door and unlatched it before the knock came. Deputy Hannah Mercer stood on the porch. She was 38, tall for a woman, with a practical build shaped more by field work than gym mirrors. Her blonde hair, darker at the roots, was pulled back into a low tie beneath a sheriff's cap dusted with snow. A scattering of faint freckles crossed her pale cheeks. Her eyes were a sharp green, assessing without hostility. She wore the county's tan winter uniform beneath a heavy coat lined with fleece. A sidearm rested secure at her hip, but her hands were empty. "Morning, Reeves," she said evenly. "Deputy." Her gaze drifted past him, immediately catching on Ranger inside the cabin. "Still looks like he runs the place." "He does." A hint of a smile touched her mouth before disappearing. Hannah stepped inside, removing her gloves. The warmth struck her face, softening the rigid lines of cold. Then she saw Willow. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. She crouched slightly, not advancing further. "That her?" Colton nodded. Hannah studied the female dog with the detached focus of someone who had seen enough cases to know that survival stories often carried shadows behind them. "She matches two of the descriptions," Hannah said quietly. "German Shepherd, light coat, around 4 to 5 years old." Willow's eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar presence. She did not growl, but the air shifted. Hannah remained still. "I won't push it," she added calmly. Colton stepped closer to Willow, but didn't touch her. She came from upriver. There were steel anchors tangled in the driftwood. Not random. Hannah stood and removed a folded document from her coat pocket. It contained a list of missing K9 reports filed over the past 12 months. 8 dogs, she said. All working breeds, shepherds, Malinois. Some privately owned, some retired security dogs. Microchips deactivated. Deactivated? Colton's voice sharpened slightly. Burned out, Hannah clarified. Deliberate. Ranger moved closer to Willow, sensing her tension spike as voices rose. Colton glanced at the faint scarring around Willow's neck again. Electronic control. Not a stray. Not accidental. Hannah's eyes followed his line of sight. Collar? She asked. High-voltage training collar, Colton replied. Older model. Waterproof. Hannah's jaw tightened. Who uses those? She asked. Anyone who needs control from a distance. Silence settled for a moment. Then, a low diesel rumble drifted faintly from beyond the ridgeline. It was distant, barely audible. Ranger's head snapped toward the sound. Willow's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her body jerked upright. Her lips pulled back slightly, not in aggression, but in recognition. Her breathing quickened, The pups squealed at the sudden shift. Hannah heard nothing yet. Colton did. He stepped outside, scanning the far tree line beyond the slope. The diesel sound faded, gone as quickly as it came. He returned inside. Willow was still standing, trembling slightly, eyes fixed toward the direction of the sound. Hannah watched carefully. "That's not random," she murmured. "No," Colton said. He turned toward Ranger, who had moved to reposition near the door. Without thinking, Colton gave a quiet command. "Stand down." Ranger obeyed instantly, lowering himself to the floor. Willow froze. Not because of Ranger, because of the command. Her head tilted. Her body stilled in a way that was too deliberate to be instinct alone. Colton felt it immediately. He tried another, testing, cautious. "Hold." Willow did not fully comply, but she did not ignore it either. Her breathing slowed. Her posture adjusted, half an inch downward. Recognition. Not obedience. Recognition. Hannah looked between them, understanding dawning. "She's trained," she said. "Yeah," Colton replied quietly. "And not for family homes." Willow's gaze flicked from Colton to Ranger, then back to him. Something passed there. Not submission, but evaluation, as if measuring which language was being spoken. The diesel rumble did not return, but the cabin felt smaller. Hannah stood and walked toward the window, looking out over the valley. "There's an old timber lease near the abandoned quarry up north," she said after a moment. "Used to belong to a company called Vaughn Timber. Went under 2 years ago." Colton's expression did not change, but his attention sharpened. "Owner?" he asked. "Elliot Vaughn, 44. Big presence in town before the bankruptcy. Sharp dresser, smooth talker, no priors." "What changed?" "Lost contracts, debt, disappeared from public meetings." Hannah's eyes hardened slightly. "Still owns the land." Willow shifted closer to Colton's side, not touching him, but reducing the space between them by inches. A subtle alignment. Hannah noticed. "She's choosing," she said quietly. Colton didn't answer. He knelt slowly near Willow, not reaching. She did not pull away. Her amber eyes searched his face as if parsing meaning in his stillness. He didn't offer reassurance. He offered calm. That was enough for now. Hannah stepped back toward the door. "I'll check the lease records again," she said. "If someone's running dogs through that quarry, they won't do it in daylight." Colton nodded. When she stepped outside, the cold rushed in briefly before the door shut again. Silence returned, but not the same silence as before. Colton crouched near Willow and studied the faint burn marks more closely in the daylight. He did not touch them. He only observed. "Distance control," he murmured to himself. Willow's ears flicked. Ranger shifted closer, not out of jealousy, but watchfulness. Colton leaned back against the wall and allowed the weight of understanding to settle. If Willow had been part of a system that required remote enforcement, she was not just lost. She had escaped. That meant someone might be looking. The puppies stirred, pressing against their mother's warmth. Willow lowered her head gently over them, but her gaze remained lifted, alert, calculating. Not prey, not helpless, something in between. Colton met her eyes. "Whatever you ran from," he said quietly, "it didn't finish the job." She blinked once. Slowly. Outside, wind brushed snow from the pines in soft cascades. Inside, the fire burned steadily. Trust had not fully formed, but suspicion had shifted direction. And for the first time, they were no longer separate survivors under one roof. They were participants in the same unanswered question. The storm left behind a sky too clear to trust. 3 days after Deputy Hannah Mercer's visit, the temperature shifted just enough to begin loosening the crust of ice that had sealed the valley. Meltwater trickled from the higher slopes in thin silver threads. The Flathead River still ran cold and strong, but its roar had softened into something steadier, less chaotic, more deliberate. Colton Reeves stood outside the cabin before sunrise, tightening the straps on his worn pack. His olive gray tactical shirt bore new creases from long hours without rest. The earth-toned combat pants carried faint stains of mud and ash. The old military boots were still damp along the seams, but he ignored it. He had worked in worse conditions. Ranger waited at his side, alert and balanced, reading Colton's breathing the way he once read the weight of a rifle sling before a mission. Willow stood several feet behind them. She did not follow immediately. Her gray cream coat caught the pale morning light, softer now that it had dried fully. The faint scarring at her neck remained barely visible beneath fur. Her pup slept inside the cabin, secured behind a wooden gate Colton had assembled the night before. He had hesitated before leaving them, but he knew something had to be confirmed before night fell again. Willow stepped forward at last, not because she was called, because she chose to. They moved north toward the old quarry lease Hannah had mentioned. The trail climbed steadily through pine forest thinned by years of logging. Snow clung in patches, but much of it had melted into damp earth that carried scent easily. Ranger led by a controlled margin, not pulling, not straining, just scanning. His amber eyes swept left and right. His ears flicked at distant bird calls and snapping branches. Willow followed slightly behind Colton's right shoulder, not submissive, not entirely aligned, but close enough to indicate intention. They began to smell it halfway up the ridge. Oil, faint, old, mixed with rust. Colton slowed. "Easy," he murmured. Both dogs adjusted pace instantly. The forest thinned abruptly at the top of the incline, revealing a wide clearing carved decades ago for stone extraction. The quarry itself yawned like a scar in the earth, stepped rock walls descending into a basin partially filled with meltwater. The structures near the basin were skeletal remnants of industry: corrugated metal sheds, a half-collapsed conveyor frame, thick cables coiled like abandoned serpents. But something about the place did not feel abandoned. The air carried recent disturbance. Ranger lowered his nose toward the ground, tracing a path across damp gravel. Willow remained upright, scanning rather than sniffing. Colton stepped carefully down the first stone ledge, boots grinding against rock. He paused when Ranger stiffened beside a concrete slab near the main shed. There, partially concealed by fallen tarp and debris, were steel anchor bolts drilled deep into the concrete. Heavy-duty, purposeful, not old. Colton crouched and brushed away gravel. The metal was not rusted through. It had been maintained. A few yards away, he found thick chain links partially buried beneath slush. Ranger let out a low rumble, not aggressive, alert. Willow had not moved closer yet. She stood at the edge of the clearing, body tense but not retreating. Colton rose slowly and walked toward the nearest metal shed. The sliding door hung crookedly, but it had been recently forced open from the inside. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant layered over something older. animal scent masked but not erased. Light filtered through gaps in the corrugated roof. Colton stepped into the dim interior. There were steel cages bolted to the floor, 3 large enclosures aligned in a row. Thick welded bars, reinforced latches, drainage grooves cut into the concrete beneath them. This had not been temporary holding. It had been systematic containment. Ranger entered behind him, scanning corners, nose low. Colton noticed a plastic bin overturned near the wall. He righted it carefully. Inside were discarded electronic components, waterproof shock collars, battery packs, remote transmitters. His jaw tightened. "Distance enforcement," he muttered. That was when Willow stepped into the doorway. She did not bark. She did not growl. She walked directly toward the middle cage and stopped. She did not touch it. She did not paw at it. She simply stood. Her body stilled in a way that went beyond memory. Colton felt it. Not fear. Recognition. He watched her closely. Her breathing slowed. Not shallow. Not frantic. Measured. As if remembering discipline. Then, she lowered her head slightly. Not in submission. In calculation. And in that stillness, something subtle shifted. She was not revisiting trauma. She was evaluating space, a place she had once navigated under constraint. Colton stepped closer to the cage and examined the latch. It was scratched along the interior edge. Claw marks, deep, repeated, but not random. They followed a pattern near the hinge. Ranger moved to the far corner of the shed and began pawing at loose boards. Colton crossed to him and pulled aside the warped panel. Behind it was a shallow trench cut into the concrete, a hidden channel, large enough to conceal wiring or small cargo. His eyes darkened. This had not been only about dogs. Footsteps crunched on gravel outside. Colton straightened immediately, hand resting lightly on the sidearm at his hip, not drawing. A tall man in his early 50s emerged into the clearing. He wore a heavy brown work coat lined with shearling and thick gloves stained with grease. His face was long and wind-cut, with gray stubble shadowing his jaw. His nose had been broken at least once. His posture carried a blend of defensiveness and fatigue. "Didn't expect visitors," the man called. His voice was rough but not confrontational. Colton stepped out of the shed slowly. "Public land," he replied evenly. The man eyed Ranger first, then Willow. Recognition flickered across his face, quickly suppressed. "You lost?" the man asked. "No." The man exhaled sharply through his nose. "Name's Owen Kessler," he said. "I keep an eye on the lease boundaries. Used to work for Vaughn Timber before it folded." His eyes shifted toward the cages inside the shed. Colton watched carefully. Kessler's hands flexed inside his gloves. "They clear most of that out weeks ago," he said too quickly. "Clear what?" Colton asked. Kessler hesitated. "Equipment." Ranger's ears angled toward Kessler's truck parked near the tree line. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. Willow stepped forward, not aggressively, but placing herself between Kessler and the shed entrance. Her body language was precise, not protective of Colton, protective of the space. Kessler noticed. He swallowed. "She looks familiar," he muttered. Colton's gaze sharpened. "From where?" Kessler shook his head too quickly. "Could be mistaken." Silence stretched thin. Then, Willow did something unexpected. She turned her head sharply, not toward Kessler, but toward the far side of the quarry basin. Her ears went forward. Her body aligned in a straight line toward a narrow trail cut into the rock wall. Ranger caught it a heartbeat later. Both dogs focused on the same direction. Kessler's eyes flicked there too, only for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Colton saw it. The man knew something about that trail. Kessler cleared his throat. "Best not wander too deep in there," he said. "Rock shifts this time of year." Concern did not reach his eyes. He backed toward his truck. "Lease ends soon anyway," he added. "Nothing left worth looking at." The engine started. He drove away without another word. Silence reclaimed the clearing. Colton turned slowly toward the narrow rock trail Willow had indicated. It descended along the basin wall, partially concealed by fallen debris. Ranger waited for direction. Willow did not move until Colton stepped forward. Then she followed. The trail led down into a lower cut of the quarry, rarely visible from above. Meltwater pooled in shallow depressions along the path. Halfway down, Ranger halted abruptly. Colton saw it too. Fresh tire tracks. Not old, not weeks. Hours. He crouched and pressed his fingers into the soft mud within the track. Still damp from compression. Recent. He rose slowly. The air felt different here. Less open. More contained. Willow's body had shifted again. Not fearful, but alert with purpose. Colton studied her profile. "You weren't just held," he murmured quietly. "You worked." She did not break gaze from the basin floor. At the bottom of the cut, partially obscured by stacked pallets and torn tarp, sat a reinforced metal crate. Heavy-duty, ventilated, the kind used for high-value transport. Colton did not approach it yet. He scanned the perimeter first. Ranger circled wide. Willow remained fixed. Evidence had not been erased. It had been relocated. And whatever operation had once occupied this quarry, it had not ended. It had adapted. Colton straightened, eyes narrowing against the wind. Willow was no longer only a rescued animal. She was the surviving link in something organized, something still moving. He did not need to say it aloud. Both dogs already understood. The quarry was not empty. It was paused. Colton did not return from the quarry with relief. He returned with confirmation. By late afternoon, he had delivered photographs of the cages, the concealed trench, and the transport crate to Deputy Hannah Mercer at the county substation. Hannah had listened without interrupting, her green eyes sharp and analytical beneath fluorescent light. She had not dismissed him. She had not promised immediate action either. Rural investigations moved slowly when land ownership and private leases tangled with law enforcement jurisdiction. Now dusk settled over the valley like a closing fist. The cabin stood alone among pines that seemed taller in fading light. The snow had hardened into thin crust along the clearing. Cold air pressed against Colton's lungs as he stepped out of his truck. Ranger exited first, scanning the perimeter in widening arcs. His gait was silent, shoulders rolling smoothly beneath thick gray cream fur. Willow followed more cautiously. Her body remained close to Colton's leg, not touching, but aligned. Colton stopped halfway up the path to the porch. The wind had smoothed most of the snow into shallow ridges, but not all of it. There were prints, not Ranger's, not his own. Bootprints circled the side of the cabin, near the back window, measured, patient. Whoever had walked there had not rushed. Colton's jaw tightened, but his face remained impassive. He raised 2 fingers subtly. Ranger shifted left without a sound. Willow's ears flattened slightly. Her breathing changed. Not panicked, but electric. Colton moved slowly around the cabin's exterior. The latch on the back window remained intact. The lock unbroken. But beneath the sill, he found a thin groove pressed into the snow. Someone had leaned there, watching. He stepped back, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No engine noise. No voices. Only wind whispering across the clearing. Inside the cabin, everything appeared undisturbed. The pups stirred in their wooden enclosure near the hearth, blind faces lifting toward scent. Willow rushed to them immediately, checking each one, nudging them closer to her warmth. Ranger took position beside the door and did not move again. Colton stood in the center of the room, hands resting loosely at his... They know. The realization was not loud. It did not hit like a shock. It settled. If someone had checked the cabin without breaking entry, they were not amateurs. They were confirming presence. Willow's presence. He crouched and examined the interior window frame more closely. A faint smudge marred the lower edge of the glass. Oil residue, almost invisible unless angled against light. Glove oil. Someone had pressed a hand there. He exhaled slowly. "You weren't just held," he murmured toward Willow. "You're valuable." Willow lifted her head at his voice, not confused, listening. Night deepened. Colton reinforced the shutters before full darkness set in. He moved with deliberate calm, hammering extra boards across the back window. Ranger followed each movement with steady eyes. Willow remained near the pups, but her gaze tracked Colton across the room whenever he shifted too far from view. The air inside felt different now, thinner. Colton lit an additional lantern and placed it near the rear wall, casting long shadows across timber beams. He did not eat dinner. He did not sit. He watched. An hour passed. 2. Outside, the moon rose pale behind shifting cloud cover. Then Willow did something she had not done before. She left the pups. Not far, only to the center of the cabin floor. She stood there, facing Colton directly. Her posture was straight, not defensive, not submissive, intent. Colton held her gaze. Ranger did not interfere. The cabin seemed to narrow around them. Willow stepped forward, slowly, one paw at a time. She stopped within arm's reach, her eyes locked onto his, amber reflecting lantern light like banked embers. Then, deliberately, she lowered her head and pressed her nose lightly against his palm. It lasted only a second, but it was unmistakable. Not obedience, not fear, choice. Colton did not move. His throat tightened in a way he had not felt in years. He did not pet her. He did not seize the moment. He simply remained steady. And Willow withdrew, returning to her pups as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had. Outside, a branch snapped sharply in the forest. Ranger was on his feet instantly. Colton extinguished the lantern nearest the window. Silence fell thick. Footsteps. Faint. Slow. Circling. Colton did not reach for his rifle immediately. He listened first. 2 sets of steps. Not deer. Human weight. Willow stood again, but this time she did not tremble. She positioned herself between the pups and the door. Ranger moved toward the rear corner of the cabin, ready to intercept if entry came from that side. Colton stepped to the door and placed one hand on the latch, not opening it. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned. 2 complete. He waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 3. Then, the faint crunch of snow retreating, not running, walking, deliberate. Colton remained at the door for a full 5 minutes after the sound faded. Only then did he move to the side window and peer out between the shutters. Nothing. But something else caught his attention. A glint near the woodpile. He stepped outside cautiously, Ranger at his side. The night air sliced through his shirt. Near the stacked firewood, partially embedded in snow, lay a small object, a metal dog tag, not Ranger's. Colton bent and lifted it. Blank, no engraving, no name, just cold metal. A message, not a threat shouted loudly, but a whisper placed where he would find it. He stared into the darkness beyond the clearing. "They're testing," he murmured. Ranger's body remained coiled but controlled. Inside, Willow had not moved from her guarding position. Colton closed his fist around the tag and returned indoors. He did not show it to Willow. He did not need to. She already knew danger had brushed close. He locked the door again and placed a heavy chair beneath the handle. Then he moved the pup's enclosure slightly farther from the back wall. An instinctive shift, small but intentional. He finally sank into a wooden chair across from Willow. The lantern light carved sharp lines along his clean-shaven jaw and high cheekbones. His gray-blue eyes held something heavier than anger. Regret. Memory surfaced unbidden. Years ago, a command had come through his earpiece. Withdraw. He had looked at civilians trapped inside a collapsing structure and made a different choice. He had stayed. 2 men under him had not returned. The Board of Review had called it a tactical miscalculation. He had called it a debt. Now, staring at Willow and her pups, he felt the old fear return. Not fear of violence, but fear of failing to protect again. "I don't get to be too late," he whispered into the room. Willow's eyes did not waver. She did not need words. She needed presence. Outside, the forest shifted in low murmurs. No further footsteps came. No attempt at entry. But the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was observant. Colton remained awake long after midnight. Rifle within reach, but not in hand. Ranger dozed in brief intervals without fully surrendering awareness. Willow slept in short fragments, one ear always angled toward the door. The metal tag rested on the table between them. Proof. They were not imagining the threat. They were being measured. And this time, Colton would not leave. Snow began just after sundown. Not a storm this time. No wind tearing at the roof. No lightning splitting the sky. Just a steady, deliberate descent of white. The kind of snowfall that muffled sound and erased tracks. The kind that made distance feel deceptive. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low but steady. Colton Reeves sat at the wooden table near the front window, a map unfolded beneath his hands. The blank metal dog tag still rested beside it, catching firelight in dull glints. He hadn't told Hannah about the tag yet, not because he distrusted her, because he understood escalation. Ranger lay near the door, not asleep, never fully asleep, his gray-cream coat rising and falling with measured breaths. Willow remained with the pups, but not curled around them tonight. She stood, body angled toward the door, as if sensing something beneath the calm surface of the evening. Colton checked his watch. 21:43. The snow thickened. He rose to reinforce the latch one final time, sliding the internal steel bar across the doorframe. He had replaced the standard lock that afternoon with a reinforced deadbolt, small changes that felt insufficient against a determined adversary. Then Ranger's ears lifted. No bark, no growl, just a subtle stiffening. Willow mirrored him a heartbeat later. Colton did not move toward the door. He moved toward the back of the cabin instead, because that was where entry would come. The sound was almost too soft to catch. Metal against metal. A careful scrape. Not forceful. Measured. They weren't kicking the door. They weren't testing windows. They had a key. Colton felt it in his spine before he saw it. The slight vibration of the door latch disengaging. He had replaced the front lock, but not the secondary side entrance used for wood deliveries years ago. The handle turned slowly. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing evidence. The door opened 2 inches, then 4. 2 men stepped inside. The first was tall and narrow-shouldered, mid-30s, face long and angular, with a trimmed beard too precise to be casual. His eyes were pale and clinical, scanning the room without emotion. He wore a black insulated jacket and gloves fitted tight for grip. In his right hand was a control pole, a professional dog restraint tool with a locking cable loop at the end. The second man was heavier, late 40s, shaved head with a deep scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His jaw was thick and blunt. He carried a compact electric prod in one hand, its insulated handle matte black, built for livestock control. They closed the door behind them without slamming it. Professional. Ranger rose first. Not lunging. Assessing. Willow shifted backward, positioning herself directly in front of the pup's enclosure. Colton stepped into view from the hallway. No panic in his posture. No weapon drawn. Yet. "You're in the wrong cabin," he said evenly. The bearded man tilted his head slightly. "Just picking up property," he replied. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Which one?" Colton asked. The heavy-set man's gaze moved toward Willow. "That one." Willow's muscles tightened, but she did not bark. The cable loop shot forward, fast. Ranger intercepted before it reached her. His movement was surgical, teeth clamping onto the pole's shaft near the base, jerking it sideways. The bearded man swore and adjusted grip, trying to re-aim. The heavy-set man stepped around them, raising the electric prod. The crackle of charge filled the room. Colton moved then. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, seizing the heavier man's wrist just before the prod connected with Ranger's flank. The shock discharged into air, snapping loudly. For half a second, the smell of ozone burned sharp in the cabin. The heavier man twisted, swinging a fist toward Colton's jaw. Colton deflected, pivoting his weight and driving the man back against the wall. Years of controlled combat training returned, not rage, not frenzy, precision. The bearded man regained footing and redirected the cable toward Willow. And this was the moment everything changed. Willow did not retreat. She did not scatter. She stepped forward, not wildly, not recklessly. Her body lowered, muscles aligned with calculated intent. When the cable loop neared her neck, she shifted sideways at the last instant and struck, not at the man's arm, but at his forearm tendon, a targeted bite. She released immediately before he could counter. He shouted in pain, dropping the pole. Ranger lunged next, slamming into the man's torso and driving him backward into the table. The map scattered. The metal tag clattered to the floor. The heavier man broke free from Colton's grip and brought the prod around again. This time, Colton did not hesitate. He struck the man's forearm hard enough to send the device skidding across the floor. The man's balance faltered. Colton followed through, forcing him face first into the wall and locking his arm behind his back. The cabin filled with breath and movement and splintered wood. Then, a gunshot echoed outside, not aimed at the cabin, a warning. followed by shouted commands. "Sheriff's Department, drop it!" The bearded man froze. Ranger's teeth hovered inches from his throat. Colton held his position. Deputy Hannah Mercer entered first, firearm drawn but steady. Snow clung to her shoulders. Behind her were 2 county deputies in winter gear. One of them was Marcus Doyle, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with close-cropped hair and a calm, measured demeanor. He had once served alongside Hannah in a search and rescue unit before joining county enforcement. His eyes scanned the room quickly, absorbing every angle without theatrics. "Hands where I can see them," Hannah ordered. The bearded man complied slowly, blood seeping from his forearm where Willow had struck. The heavier man struggled once, briefly, before Marcus secured him with cuffs. Snow drifted through the still open doorway. Silence reclaimed the room in fragments. Hannah stepped toward Colton, eyes flicking to Willow, then Ranger. "You called it," she said quietly. Colton nodded once. "I told you escalation was coming." Hannah's gaze dropped to the fallen control pole and the electric prod on the floor. "Not poachers," she murmured. "No," Colton replied. "Recovery team." Willow had not moved from her guarding position, but her breathing had slowed. Ranger remained between the detained men and the pups. Marcus escorted the heavier man outside. The bearded man met Colton's eyes once before being led away. No hatred there, only calculation. The snow continued falling. Hannah turned back toward Colton. "We picked up Vaughn an hour ago," she said. Colton's jaw tightened slightly. "Resisting?" he asked. "Denied everything, but we found financial transfers tied to this property." She nodded toward the captured men. "These 2 were on payroll." Willow finally stepped away from the pups, slowly. She approached Colton. Her amber eyes met his again, not fearful, not reactive, aware. Colton crouched this time. He placed one hand gently against the side of her neck, careful to avoid the scar. She did not pull away. Outside, flashing patrol lights reflected off falling snow, turning the clearing into alternating bands of red and blue. The night had not stayed quiet, but it had not taken what it came for. Hannah moved toward the door. "We'll sweep the perimeter," she said. "Make sure no one else is lurking." Colton nodded. As deputies moved through the snow, the cabin door remained open briefly, letting in cold air and the scent of pine. Inside, the fire crackled steadily. The metal dog tag lay near the overturned chair. Colton picked it up and held it for a long moment before setting it down again. This was not finished. But tonight, no one had been taken, and no one had been too late. Winter did not arrive with violence. It arrived with restraint. The first true snowfall after the arrests came in a quiet sweep across the valley, settling into pine branches and along the banks of the Flathead River without storm or spectacle. The river itself had narrowed from its earlier rage. Glacier melt continued beneath the surface, but the current no longer roared. It moved with patient force, carving its path without asking to be noticed. Inside the cabin, the air felt different. Not safer in the naive sense, just steadier. Colton Reeves stood outside at dawn, breath rising in pale ribbons before his face. The cold sharpened the edges of his features, the square line of his jaw clean-shaven, cheekbones defined beneath wind-worn skin. His dark brown hair, cut in disciplined military fashion, stirred slightly in the breeze. His gray-blue eyes scanned the tree line as they always had, but they no longer scanned for ghosts. Ranger stood at his left, tall and solid, his gray-cream coat thickened against the cold. The metal tag at his collar clicked softly as he shifted weight a son. His gaze followed Colton's, not tense, just aware. Behind them, the cabin door opened. Willow stepped out first. Her coat had regained its healthy sheen in recent weeks, the faint marks around her neck barely visible now beneath winter fur. Her posture was no longer rigid. She carried herself with controlled calm. The past still lived in her body, but it no longer commanded it. Two young shepherd pups tumbled awkwardly behind her, large-eared, oversized paws outpacing coordination. Their coats mirrored Willow's pale gray-cream coloring, though darker flecks hinted at Ranger's lineage in one of them. Colton watched them stumble into fresh snow for the first time. They sneezed, then pounced at nothing. Ranger lowered himself to their level, allowing them to climb clumsily over his forelegs without correction. Willow observed without intervening. She trusted the scene. That alone would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Deputy Hannah Mercer's patrol truck rolled slowly into the clearing mid-morning, not with urgency, but familiarity. She stepped out without reaching for her sidearm, a quiet signal of trust. Her blonde hair was tucked beneath a knit cap this time, uniform coat replaced by a thick civilian parka. Snow dusted her shoulders. "You're becoming a sanctuary," she called lightly. Colton offered the faintest trace of a smile. Hannah approached Willow carefully, but without hesitation. The first time she had met the shepherd, there had been tension coiled beneath every glance. Now, Willow regarded her with measured neutrality. "Court date's set for Vaughn," Hannah said, brushing snow from her sleeve. "Financial crimes are sticking. Animal trafficking charges are stronger than we expected." Colton nodded. "Others?" he asked. "Two more suspects identified through transaction logs. We're working with state investigators now." Her gaze shifted toward the pups tumbling in the snow. "They'll testify without saying a word," she added softly. Willow's ears flicked at the tone of Hannah's voice. Not threat, recognition. Hannah crouched slightly, not touching, not assuming, and Willow did not retreat. The river beyond the trees caught sunlight in a muted glint. Later that week, a man named Dr. Elias Romero visited the cabin at Hannah's recommendation. He was in his early 50s, tall and lean, with silver threaded through dark hair tied loosely at the nape of his neck. His face was long and thoughtful, framed by thin wire-rimmed glasses. Years of working in wildlife rehabilitation had carved lines of patience around his eyes. He moved with deliberate gentleness, as if every room he entered contained something fragile. He examined Willow without restraint devices. "She's not aggressive," he observed quietly. "She's discerning." Colton watched closely as Dr. Romero inspected the scar around Willow's neck. "Neurological response?" Colton asked. "Minimal residual sensitivity," Romero replied. "Whatever conditioning was used, it was systematic, but not permanent." Willow held still during the examination, not submissive but cooperative. Romero glanced toward Colton. "She's chosen this place," he said. "That matters." The pups climbed over Romero's boots during his assessment. He laughed softly, allowing them to tug at the laces. "They'll need structure soon," he added. "Not discipline. Structure." Colton understood the difference. That night, as wind brushed gently against cabin walls, Colton sat by the fire with the metal dog tag resting once more on the table. He had kept it, not as a trophy, as reminder. Willow lay beside him, not pressed against him, but close enough that warmth overlapped. Ranger slept nearer the door, though his breathing was deeper now, less vigilance in every inhale. The pups dozed in an open pen, no longer gated in fear. Colton reached down slowly, and rested his hand against Willow's shoulder. This time she leaned into it, just slightly. The moment passed quietly. Outside, a branch cracked under the weight of snow sliding free. Ranger lifted his head briefly, then lowered it again. And then Willow stood abruptly, not alarmed, alert. She walked toward the front door. Colton rose instinctively. She paused there, not growling, not braced, just standing, listening. He opened the door cautiously. No one stood in the clearing, but fresh snow carried no new prints, only one set of tracks, large, paw-shaped, leading from the forest edge toward the cabin, and stopping 20 yards away. Colton stepped forward carefully. The tracks circled once, then retreated. Wolf. Ranger stepped up beside him. Willow did not move forward. She did not bristle. She watched the tree line calmly. The wolf had approached and left, not challenged, not threatened. Something in the valley had shifted. Predators measured risk and decided differently. Colton closed the door quietly. Inside, Willow returned to the fire. She did not check the pups in panic. She did not pace, she settled. Trust had altered the equation. Days passed. Snow deepened. Colton resumed small search and rescue patrols through the valley, non-combat, civilian assistance for stranded hikers and injured livestock. Ranger accompanied him as always. Willow began coming too, not as a weapon, as a partner. When a young boy named Caleb Turner went missing briefly along the frozen riverbank, a 10-year-old with dark hair and too much curiosity for his own good, it was Willow who caught the faint scent trail first. Caleb's mother, Lila Turner, a tall woman with auburn hair braided down her back and hands calloused from farm work, had arrived at the cabin in tears when she realized her son had wandered too far. Lila's face had been pale beneath freckles, fear carving sharp lines around her mouth. She had trusted Colton immediately, not because of his past, which she did not know, but because of the steadiness in his eyes. Willow had tracked without hesitation, not frantic, focused. She led them to Caleb within 20 minutes, cold, frightened, but unharmed. When the boy wrapped his arms around Willow's neck in gratitude, she did not stiffen. She accepted it. Colton saw it then. The retraining had not erased her strength. It had redirected it. That evening, as Caleb and his mother drove away safe, Lila had looked back once at the cabin and said quietly, "Some things come back different, stronger." Colton had not answered. He had only watched Willow as she returned to her pups. Winter continued. The river narrowed further, then widened again beneath thaw cycles. Time moved, not dramatically, not loudly, just forward. One evening near the end of the season, Colton stood again at the riverbank where everything had begun. The water no longer raged, it flowed. Willow stood beside him, Ranger a step behind. The pups, no longer tiny, explored snowbanks without fear. Colton exhaled slowly. He understood something now that had once escaped him. He had not been saved by accident. He had been changed by choice. The choice to step into freezing water. The choice not to withdraw. The choice to stay. Beside him, Willow did not look at the river. She looked at him. No chain, no collar, no command required. And this time, no one was left behind. Sometimes we look for miracles in the sky, in signs and wonders, in moments so extraordinary they cannot be ignored. But often, God does not send miracles as flashes of light or thunder from above. Sometimes he sends them in quieter forms, in a cry carried over water, in a door that opens at the right moment, in the courage to step forward when fear says step back. Colton did not see an angel in the storm. He saw a life that needed saving. Yet perhaps that was the miracle. Not that the river calmed, not that danger disappeared, but that he was there, at that exact moment, with the strength, the choice, and the heart to act. Willow did not trust easily. Pain had shaped her. But even after control, fear, and survival, she chose to lean toward trust again. That too is a kind of miracle, because healing is not magic. It is decision. It is grace meeting willingness. In our daily lives, miracles may look small. A second chance. A conversation that softens anger. A child who comes home safely. The strength to forgive. The courage to stay when walking away would be easier. Perhaps God does not always remove the river. Perhaps he places us in it, together, so that no one has to face it alone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that faith can live in action and that hope can survive even the coldest seasons, take a moment to share it with someone who might need that reminder today. Leave a comment and tell us where you have seen grace at work in your own life. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing stories that strengthen the heart and restore belief. And may God watch over you and your family. May he protect your home, guide your choices, and give you courage when the waters rise. May you recognize the miracles that are already walking beside you, sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes in human form, and may you never be too late to choose love.